Hello everyone, for Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. Thanks for joining us. To begin, some hours ago, the French Parliament voted in favor of extending martial law for 3 more months there. Now, with 551 lawmakers voting in favor and only 6 against, an overwhelming majority of deputies approved authorizing the government to extend the declared state of emergency, which limits citizens' liberties. Now, the extension will now have to be approved by the Senate, which will review it on Friday. The key suspect believed to be the mastermind behind the Paris attacks last week was confirmed dead shortly before the parliamentary vote there. Abdelhamid Al-Mahoud, who had been fighting with the Islamic State in Syria, was killed yesterday during a raid in the Parisian neighborhood of Saint Denis. French police are still looking for another attacker, Salah Abdeslam, who is on the run. The French Prime Minister Manuel Valls urged Parliament to approve the state of emergency in order to capture other suspects still at large.
Most of you already know this, but thanks to the operation that was led yesterday by the Elite Research and Intervention Police Unit, the French prosecutor has just confirmed that Aboud, the mastermind of the attacks, or one of the masterminds, should I say, was killed.
Today marks 3 years since peace talks between the FARC guerrillas and the Colombian government began. Social movements and organizations from civil society will send a letter to both delegations in Havana requesting them to speed up the negotiations. And in that same spirit, the FARC guerrillas issued a statement urging the government and Colombians in general to focus on issues in which there is agreement to move forward in the peace process. The FARC leadership said it is not the time to, quote, stir the waters.
Ladies and gentlemen of the state, we do not see discord now when everything is achievable with intelligence, common sense, words, dialogues, and agreements. We wish this to avoid major storms.
And Colombia's armed conflict is over 50 years old. After 3 years of negotiations, it certainly won't be easy to restore peace in that country. A special report now by our correspondent Natalia Margarita explores the 3rd anniversary of these peace talks.
Carrying with her nothing but her story, Nubi is just one face of the over 7 million victims that Colombia's 5-decade-long conflict has left. As the country enters its 3rd year of peace negotiations, her main concern remains the same: the paramilitaries that murdered her husband and less than a year after raped, tortured, and killed her 15-year-old daughter.
What is going to happen with the paramilitaries? That's the question I have always asked myself. Peace is going to be reached with the guerrillas. And what about the paramilitaries? Because it is them that are the ones who continue perpetrating crimes and expanding.
Within a peace process that has advanced much further than any previous negotiations with the FARC, paramilitarism has come as one of the most pressing issues, particularly after a historic agreement on justice aimed to compensate the victims was reached in September.
What is historic is that now truth and acknowledgement of responsibility have finally the possibility to be the center, the entry point for compensating the victims. And that's the way it must be done.
Apart from the point of victims and justice, the parties have also reached agreements on the points of rural development, political participation, and illegal drugs, meaning there has been success in 4 of the 6 points of the negotiation agenda. But beyond that is the impact that the peace process has had over society.
Awareness on the issue of peace has grown within Colombian society. When the first term of President Santos began 5 years ago, people were ignoring and even denying the existence of the armed conflict. Now we are already speaking about signing a peace agreement.
And it is within the recognition of an armed conflict that rural realities have finally surfaced, shedding light on the complexities of that conflict. Realities such as the one of Pablo, who, having dedicated his entire life to working the land, still confronts a historic abandonment by the state.
They are people that have to sell their land in order to pay back to the banks. They fall in misery, so what they have done, they get filled with anger and go to join the guerrillas to fight.
Such stories have come to reveal that bringing to an end more than 50 years of armed conflict and social inequality will take much more than 3 years of negotiations, and certainly a good amount of will and commitment from all the Colombian society. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
And as Telesur and The Intercept revealed yesterday, the United States National Security Agency has been spying on Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA. Now, after the revelation yesterday, Venezuelan authorities reacted here. President Nicolas Maduro announced his government would hand in an official letter to the U.S. Embassy protesting against the spying program. And we'll be updating you with that briefing. But first, we're going to go to our correspondent, Isabel Fimbo, here in Caracas. Isabel, we just saw the response from the U.S. Embassy. What's the reactions here in Venezuela, and has this issue affected people's views ahead of very important elections coming up December 6th here?
Well, Cody, the feeling here is that people are definitely angry, but not altogether surprised. I've had people tell me that it's something that they've actually suspected for quite a long time and even talked about. In terms of the effect on the election, well, this morning President Nicolas Maduro wrote a letter of protest to the United States about it, but the opposition has yet to make a comment about the spying. So we'll see what that effect has on the actual election.
And Isabel, we've learned more about those documents exactly. We now know that the CIA was also working with the NSA there. So what was the CIA's role in all of this? And also on another note, do we know what the White House knew about this spying program here in Venezuela?
Well, what the CIA did in all of this was that they were part of something called the Special Collection Program. Now, CIA agents came to Venezuela posing as US diplomats when they would be in the US Embassy here in Caracas, sweeping up massive amounts of data using CIA spy technology. Now, we don't know for certain whether Barack Obama knew about this program, but what we do know was that one of the reports was dated back to 2010 during his first term in office. So it is likely that he might have known. However, the U.S. State Department has yet to respond to questions for comment, so we can't confirm that yet.
All right, Isabel, thanks so much. For more analysis now, we're going to turn to U.S. Venezuelan lawyer and researcher Eva Gollinger. She joins us from New York. She's also the host of the RT program, Detrás de la Noticia. Eva, thanks so much for joining us. We've read that the surveillance program began here in Venezuela after the Venezuelan government nationalized an oil field that was in the hands of Exxon. Now, do we know, have you ever been able to figure out if we know whether the spying was being used to provide information to Exxon?
Well, first of all, under my own investigations, I believe, and it's demonstrated that the spying began before that, certainly back well before that, probably when the program first began, this mass sort of surveillance in the U.S. after 9/11. I mean, there was the coup in Venezuela in 2002 against Chavez. The U.S. was already heavily involved. And then as of 2005, there was a special intelligence for Venezuela and Cuba that reported directly to the director of national intelligence. It was a high-level mission, even above CIA, NSA, or any of the other 16 intelligence agencies of the U.S. So they were already engaging in, a very high priority level of intelligence collection, analysis, operations against Venezuela at that time. Now I do believe that since what the documents have shown that have been released by Edward Snowden, certainly there was an increase in an escalation in that level of surveillance, particularly directed at PDVSA, although PDVSA has always been one of the most strategic interests of the U.S. in Venezuela, precisely because it's one of the largest oil companies, state-owned oil companies in the region, in the world actually, and because of the fact that Chavez retook control of that company. It had long been operating as though it were a private corporation, even though it was nationalized in 1976. So in any case, what I do believe could be possible is that certainly there was some level of sharing of information passed to Exxon that Exxon utilized. I mean, it was, I'm not sure if you could still hear me. Certainly that the information seemed to have been utilized by Exxon at that time. You know, the U.S. considers Exxon and its major corporations, multinationals that are invested in countries around the world, to be part of U.S. interests. So they defend their interests as well. So I don't think there's any question that there was some kind of collusion there and sharing of intelligence.
So do you think it's important here to distinguish, obviously those spying programs began after 9/11, but to distinguish between spying for corporate interests or providing that information for corporate interests and spying in the interest of safety and to prevent terrorism? Also, another question, would it be illegal under international law for a government to give privileged information to a private company?
Of course, and it would be illegal under U.S. law to do that. I mean, that's not a justification. They certainly, you know, the U.S. has a very expansive sort of understanding that they utilize to justify their own actions of what is terrorism and the war on terror and what are U.S. interests around the world, that then they're able to engage in activities that are generally illegal and violate the sovereignty of other nations and violate the U.S. Constitution. So, I mean, were that to be happening, and it wouldn't be surprising if it were, that the U.S. was sharing intelligence with Exxon and other of its companies that were in Venezuela at that time, then certainly it would be illegal. But I don't doubt that they were doing that. I don't doubt that.
And quickly, the documents also mention this so-called F6 unit in the U.S. Embassy there. What is that unit? What do you make of that information?
Well, according to the documents that have been coming out that Edward Snowden obtained and has been slowly releasing, because I would assume that there's also a lot more information about Venezuela that, as I was saying before, there's been this special intelligence mission since at least 2005 that is directed at Venezuela. They have massive resources. So the so-called F6 unit is a special collection service. It's kind of a joint task force of CIA, NSA. It's like black ops espionage. So really going beyond even what traditional espionage may be, you know, engaging in activity that is obviously violating the laws of not just the country where they're operating, but also all the individuals. I mean, that's why I would say probably if they were operating that kind of office inside of the U.S. Embassy, which they were, according to this information that has been released by Snowden and on Telesur and the Intercept, that certainly that they were engaging in espionage against all levels of the Venezuelan government, particularly President Hugo Chavez, which is, you know, was the high priority at that time. I mean, Venezuela became a priority of security, strategic defense for the United States. It was labeled a top spot by the CIA as early as 2005. And again, as I said, that special mission was created right around then for intelligence. They have a fusion intelligence center operating out of Colombia, neighboring Venezuela, that fuses kind of like that F6 unit, special collection, but goes beyond just NSA, CIA, and includes DEA and DIA, which is military intelligence. You know, all kinds of things have happened in that border region since that time period, you know, that these things really began to kick up in terms of this level of U.S. espionage and U.S. aggression towards Venezuela.
And very, very quickly here, I just want to ask you how you think this might play into the upcoming elections here. In general, what are your thoughts ahead of elections here in Venezuela?
Well, I think that obviously the Venezuelan government is within all its rights under international law to protest and to ask for an explanation from the U.S. government. But I would go beyond that, because this is just one part of what the U.S. government has been doing to try to undermine democracy in Venezuela. They're also providing millions of dollars in funding to keep the opposition alive, to try to unify them. They provide campaign advisors, they do media campaign, they do social media campaigns. So all of this is also playing out in the elections. There's a
The timing of all this information is critical because there's a massive distortion campaign in media internationally about Venezuela, about the government, trying to, accuse it of all kinds of things from drug trafficking to corruption to money laundering and to being a dictatorship. So all of that has an impact on the elections. I think, as has been proven time and time again, at least during the past 10 years, Venezuela has one of the best electoral systems in the world. It's one of the most transparent. It has a double check against fraud with electronic elections machines that produce a paper ballot. They have auditing. They have, a version of electoral observers that the United States certainly doesn't have. They have a national unified electoral system that is very efficient. So I certainly think that the electoral process, as it always has in Venezuela during this decade, will go very well. It's a celebration of democracy. And I think the fact that the government, the president himself and the government party, the PSUV, has come out, has signed an agreement saying they're going to recognize the results, shows also that they're committed to maintaining democracy in the country. The problem is the other side, the opposition, that's refused to sign such agreements. That's always the side that generally tries to question the outcome of elections when it's not in their favor, and the fact that the U.S. ends up then supporting that version of events. So I think what's most important is to always maintain a critical eye when it comes to media coverage of Venezuela, and especially elections.
All right, Eva Gollinger joining us for some analysis there from New York. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Cody.
Moving on, protests are rocking Haiti's capital. Hundreds say fraud was carried out by the governing party in October's general elections. At least 2 senators were wounded on Wednesday when the opposition demonstrators and police clashed there. The country is preparing for a second round vote set for December 27th. A new poll published by an institute there shows 90% of Haitians believe there was fraud in the elections. Meanwhile, Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa has announced that he will not run for another term in office. This announcement comes as the National Assembly is debating a set of constitutional amendments which include the possibility of consecutive presidential re-election. Currently, Ecuador's constitution only allows re-election for 2 consecutive terms.
Vivo, 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 vivo.
A group of 5 Syrian nationals were detained in Honduras's airport in Tegucigalpa, but authorities have confirmed that the 5 Syrian men who were traveling with stolen Greek passports are actually students. They don't pose any threat. Their flight was headed for the United States, which caused some concerns from U.S. authorities there. Coming up from the south, we have a new report on information from the Paris attacks and why French media there is questioning its government. More details when we come back. Stay with us.
Behind the power, we lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open file, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today with Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. We need to understand the world we live in. We require news with critical points of view, thorough analysis, and social commitment. This information is vital to think, to understand, and to change. The world demands a new perspective. telesurtv.net/English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
New information has emerged regarding the recent attacks in Paris carried out by the Islamic State group. The French government is in the spotlight as the editor of a local magazine there has revealed that Syrian authorities had offered French Prime Minister Manuel Valls a list of French jihadis affiliated to the Islamic State in Syria. The information is yet to be confirmed, but it is already generating plenty of questions there in French media, as you might imagine. And according to France's Prime Minister Manuel Valls, France could face the risk of chemical or bacterial warfare in its fight against Islamist militants. Now, Valls made the statement while addressing French National Assembly earlier this Thursday. Valls did not say there was a specific threat involving such weapons. After speaking with U.S. President Barack Obama at the sidelines of the APEC summit, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has vowed that Canada will remain a partner in the fight against the Islamic State group.
I was able to underline that Canada is not only ready to do its part against climate change, but that Canada is also ready to take an active role in encouraging other states to put into action and be collectively responsible to get a good, concrete solution in Paris.
Meanwhile, the Islamic State group has announced it has killed 2 foreign hostages. Now, the men, one Norwegian and one Chinese national, had been featured in their ISIS propaganda posters, offering to sell them to whoever paid a ransom for them. According to analysts, the terrorist group would have killed them after not being able to get that money from their kidnapping. A suspected Islamist gunman has shot dead 2 Bosnian soldiers before blowing himself up in the capital city of Sarajevo. Officials say on Wednesday night the man attacked the soldiers at a betting shop and later fired at a city bus, injuring the driver and 2 passengers. He then fled and blew himself up in his house when police surrounded the area. German Chancellor Angela Merkel met with her Austrian counterpart Werner Faymann, where the focus was on Europe's refugee crisis. Speaking alongside Austrian Chancellor Faymann, Merkel said Europe needed to move faster with registration spots in Greece, where refugees and other migrants can be registered. She added that the refugees should then be fairly distributed around Europe. U.S. President Barack Obama and other world leaders met on the second day and final day of the APEC summit in Manila. Now, the gathering is meant to bolster trade and security ties, but have been clouded by the Islamic State threat half a world away. The summit closed with leaders of the 21 participating countries releasing a joint statement strongly condemning terrorism. And while the APEC meeting was underway, around 200 demonstrators protested in Manila as they gathered near a roadblock less than half a mile from the summit meeting. The protesters burned figures representing United States culture. Police and soldiers equipped with anti-riot gear clashed with the demonstrators who were chanting slogans and waving anti-APEC banners.
We just want to ask the world leaders of the APEC to put a stop to their meeting, because we know that what will follow is the plundering of our natural resources. What would follow are policies that would not be of help to the poorest of the poor.
As the car manufacturer Volkswagen faces a Friday deadline to inform regulators in the U.S. how it plans to bring its diesel cars into compliance with air quality standards, the company announced it would try to win over hundreds of thousands of consumers still waiting to hear just how the car maker plans to fix their clean diesel vehicles rigged to cheat emissions tests. Now, the company offered owners $1,000 in cash and credit. Nearly 120,000 individuals have taken the company up on its offer. The World Anti-Doping Agency continued to crack down on Russia drug cheats by suspending the country's own anti-doping agency on Wednesday. The Russian Anti-Doping Agency was suspended for non-compliance. It follows the International Anti-Doping Commission's report that detailed a widespread doping scandal in the country. President Vladimir Putin announced last week that a local probe with the help of international monitors is underway. The classic holiday ballet, The Nutcracker, has been given a hip-hop remake. Now, the idea for the hip-hop Nutcracker It was conceived at the United Palace of Cultural Arts in the United States, and the idea here was conceived by co-creators Mike Fiddleson and Jennifer Weber, who joined forces in 2013 to revamp their traditional production with hip-hop elements. The show features legendary rapper Curtis Blow. The show will premiere in New York on November 20th. Then it will head off to a 12-city tour. And the works of Bosch, who has been dubbed as the Devil's Painter, have been inspired and terrified for centuries. Now a small museum in the artist's hometown has brought together 20 of his last 25 known surviving works to mark the 500th anniversary of the Dutch painter's death. The exhibition opens in February and marks the culmination of a 9-year quest by its director to reunite Bosch's unique artistic legacy in the place where he lived, worked, and also died. And that's what we're covering today. Plenty more on all of those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. And today we're going to leave you with more from the hip-hop Nutcracker. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle.